Series. We're going to be looking at Exodus 17, called Strike the Rock is our theme. So we're going to be at Exodus 17, verses 1 through 7, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the first 4 verses, and then John 4, a familiar story of Jesus and a woman at the well. All right, everybody set? Exodus 17. Water from the rock. So as you're finding the pages, we'll set the stage. Exodus 14 that we looked at last week dealt with the story of the people going through the Red Sea. And they're being pursued by the Egyptians. God fights for them. They just need to be still. And God does fight for them. The waters separate. They pass through on dry ground. Egyptians pursue, and the waters come back and destroy them. Exodus 15. It's a song of salvation, the song of Miriam and Moses, praising God for what happened at the Red Sea. Chapter 16, though, not such a good chapter. The people already begin to mutter and murmur about what?
Not enough bread.
Not enough food. They're starving.
Yeah.
So God provides for them the quail at night and the manna. They ask, what is it? The manna in the morning. God provides for them. Chapter 15, after they sing the song of salvation, another story where they come to a water source that's sour. It's like a pond, but it's all bad water. So Moses throws a piece of wood into it, and what happens? It clears up. And so they are in this pattern now of, God, what have you done for me lately? Okay? And that's where we find them here in chapter 17. At the story of Rephidim. All right? So let's take a look. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Shin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses, and they said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. And I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" All right. So let's start with you all. Anything going on in your minds, curious or wondering, or what do you got?
How could they say that to him? After what they were through before.
They're suffering now.
Yeah.
They're only thinking about today.
Okay, only thinking about today. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems baffling to us, right?
Yeah.
To see these marvelous, wondrous works of God, and yet, they're camping at a place with no water. But what do you mean?
Human nature, I guess.
It is human nature, yeah.
How long do you think they were in the desert at this point?
Is it evident?
Not very long. It just says that they camp. They've been camping around. So, less than 3 months. Because in chapter 19, it's the 3rd month when they get to the mountain. So they've only been at this for less than 3 months.
Not long at all.
Yeah.
As bad as they were treated under slavery, they still got water and food every day.
Yeah, okay.
Not spoiled, really.
Yeah, they're slaves, but I don't know about they were spoiled, but they had a source of water and food, yeah. And that's what they keep recalling, right? In water, we had water, and they did in Egypt. They had water. Water was never a problem in Egypt because what you have? You had the Nile River. Yep. Water is not an issue in Egypt.
You know, last week when they were talking about like where did they cross and stuff, I thought it was like way up on the Red Sea because there's a narrower section that goes.
That's
through
where it
there.
could be.
Well, but in my maps, Rephidim is on the southern, you know,
It's a guess.
it's, well,
They don't know where Rephidim is.
oh, it's on this map, but
I know.
it might not be
Right.
accurate.
It might not be
Okay.
accurate. Yeah.
Cause I would think, why would they be way down there? You
Yeah.
know, I would have.
Well,
expected
eventually,
them to
that's
be-
where the mountain of, that's where they will go. They will go down to the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, where Mount
Because Mount
Sinai.
Sinai's there.
Yep.
Yeah, they have it on the map, not far from Mount
Right,
Sinai.
and that's a guess.
Yeah.
It is a guess. From everything that I did, and I heard from a guy who did some studies on this, archaeologists they're guessing if they say they know where Rephidim is.
Yeah.
They're guessing. I know that some maps will have it. I'm gonna see if it has it in my study Bible here.
Well, it has Holy Land then and Holy Land now, and it basically has it in the same spot. on
Yes,
each
my
map.
map in the study Bible has Rephidim
Just
located
north
down.
of Mount Sinai.
Yeah, and it could be. Somewhere in the desert of Shin. We know
But-
where that
But they
is.
were heading south.
They were
so
heading
that-
south, yeah.
But that surprised me because I thought if they crossed higher up on the Red Sea,
But they've been journeying for
yeah.
weeks. They've been
But
camping
I
around.
forget
it
how
says.
long they are there.
Yeah.
They were wandering around, so they do.
They
It says
said
that they're wandering in the desert.
the desert of Shin. Yep. And they're camping from place, but they
Says
don't.
here-
They.
It says wilderness, yeah, on my map it says wilderness.
It is. It is a pretty barren land, even now today. And it's rough terrain, and it's dry, and it's arid. Yeah. And
No
so
wonder they were thirsty.
you have to have a source of water, and there were sources of water, but they're not at one now. And who's leading them? Whenever they don't move camp until what?
The cloud.
The cloud moves and they move, right? So God's been leading them. And so he leads them to a place, Rephidim. And what's the characteristic of Rephidim again? There is no water. So God leads them to a place to camp where there is no water. There is no water. And now they're quarreling with Moses. And they say, give us something to drink. And Moses' response again is what?
Why are you quarreling? Why are you fighting with me?
You're not fighting. Yeah. Why are you
I mean,
quarreling with me? It's God who brought us here.
Right.
And then Moses even says, not only, they're not just quarreling with him, what are they actually doing?
They're putting God to the
Casting
test.
a
Yeah.
line.
Putting God to the test.
Yeah.
Right? What does that mean? Putting God to the test.
Well, they're kind of saying he doesn't love us, or if he's not going to take care of us, and he's not doing this, and
Yeah.
they're
Where-
challenging.
Where are you, God?
Yeah.
Right?
They're not trusting.
You're not trusting. They haven't learned the lessons, right? In fact, so when it gets time to leave that place at the very end of the story, Moses kind of renames it all. What did it say in verse 7? He names the place two different things.
Massa and Meribah.
Massah and Meribah. And the footnotes tell you what those two words mean.
Massa is testing, and Meribah is quarreling.
Because they tested the Lord.
Yeah.
Is he not among us?
They haven't learned to live by faith.
They have not. They're not learning it. They were given an opportunity to trust, and they didn't. They quarreled, and by their quarreling, by their grumbling and muttering, they're testing God. But what's remarkable about God in the midst of all of this?
That he's still giving to them.
You're going to take care of them.
Because he probably understands that by not seeing it with their own eyes, the faith is difficult.
It is. Faith, believing what you cannot see is difficult. Absolutely difficult.
It was kind of interesting, I mentioned on the end of Bird Street. It's not only the people that are moving through the desert, it's our livestock.
Yeah, yeah.
So they
Children.
have a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of sheep and goats.
Goats and camels and all those things need water too, don't they?
Yeah.
So water's a big need in the wilderness,
And
right?
all the water in the large things it's all salt water, right?
The Red Sea and all,
Yeah, the
that's
sea,
salt
all
water.
the Mediterranean, the red,
Right, that's all,
all of that
Ocean, sea.
is
not
ocean
drinking.
water.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they've come upon pools of water back in chapter 15, which are stagnant, and stagnant pools of water are not good.
sour.
Bad water, which God purified for them,
Mhm.
chapter 15, which, He's providing for them. He has provided for them in miraculous ways. But yet, when this opportunity to believe and have faith and trust arises, they quarrel with Moses. And Moses says, hey, your quarrel's with God, not me. You're testing him. And that's what they renamed the whole place. What were the people ready to do, Moses said, too?
He said they're almost ready to stone me.
Yeah, they're ready to start throwing rocks at me.
There are rocks in the desert.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I'm just teasing.
I don't think there was a shortage of those in that desert.
Oh.
Yeah. So desert isn't just sand. Wilderness, and this was a rocky terrain. Yeah. So yeah, there was plenty of rocks for them.
So if they would have stoned Moses, then what good could have come to them? I mean,
Nothing.
what were they gonna solve by doing that?
Not much.
Their anger was just there.
And Moses might have been exaggerating a little bit too, but he felt the pressure, right? These people are against me. They're ready to stone me. We're going to pick up with that image of the rocks, throwing rocks, right? Because what does God ultimately do then to solve the water problem?
It's a rock.
Strike a rock. Yeah. So God's instruction. Take some elders with you. Yeah.
And in the movie, The Ten Commandments,
Okay.
there were people within that group that got pushed out with, but they were instigators all the
The
time.
rabble.
The rabble, yeah. They always were causing trouble.
Troublemakers, huh?
Yep. And that they'll get named in the journey more so in Numbers. Numbers will, when you read the stories in Numbers of the wilderness wanderings, they'll be called the rabble. Yeah. And
Is that where we get the word rabble rouser from?
could be. Malcontents and stirring up trouble. That's what they were doing.
Agitator.
And they're the ones that, when God brings judgment, they perish.
So, especially when the Ten Commandments comes down, they made that calf. It showed they were, well, it even said the earth opened up and swallowed how many? Lots of them.
We're going to be getting that story in a couple weeks. Is it next week? No, it's 2 weeks from today.
I should see if I can find that on Amazon. I was probably
They show
there.
it every Easter.
I know, but I think it's been many years since I saw it.
The Charlton Heston one?
Yeah.
That was standard Palm Sunday. Watch it. It's when it was usually on Palm Sunday. All right, and so what I noticed was that Moses, God gives the answer to Moses, take the elders with you, and also take what? The staff. Which, and not just what staff, but what did he do with the
The
staff?
staff that he divided the waters with.
Okay. What?
That would have been a plague.
Yeah, when he struck the Nile. So this is the same staff, right, that he divided the waters with, but also the staff that when he struck the Nile River, what happened to it?
Red.
Turned red to blood, right? It's one of the plagues. And now take that same staff and go by the rock at Horeb. Horeb, see, this is why they think Rephidim is probably close to Mount Sinai, because Horeb is associated with Mount Sinai usually. That's where Moses saw the burning bush then too, in that same area. Right. And take that rock, and what is he supposed to do then? Strike the rock. Strike the rock with the staff. And what will happen? Water will come out for the people to drink.
Must have been a lot of, like, almost like a waterfall, you'd think.
Yeah.
A lot of water.
And a steady, and it appears that it's a steady flowing stream, right? kind of like a artesian well.
Yeah, cause the cattle needed it too.
So the water just keeps bubbling up, and you take your buckets and you fill it and you go.
Do they have, I suppose they had buckets.
They have buckets of some sort, something to carry
A
water.
vessel of some kind.
Jerry can, no, they didn't have jerry cans back then.
Sure, probably not.
That's what most people carry their water in though in the world. You go to a well and fill a jerry can. Yeah, and so now the water is a constant source, right? It's not just boom and water just magically appears. It's probably like an artesian well type of a water source,
Starts bubbling.
and it just doesn't stop. Now, we're going to run into this story again in 1 Corinthians when we look at that passage. Paul's going to talk about it. But before we go there, anybody else? Any other questions that you have?
So have they ever kind of estimate how many people do they really think was in this whole group?
Yeah, I've heard big numbers,
Big
up
numbers.
to 600,000.
Wow.
I think that's what I think has happened with the numberings is, again, if you would ask today Orthodox Jewish people, how many of you passed through the Red Sea?
Okay.
We all did. We all did. And so the numbers of 6. So I think the numbers were smaller than that. But who knows? We don't know for sure. I don't think it was 1 million people, which it says somewhere. I think when the stories get redacted and finally written, there was 1 million people because we all went through it, right? That was even though it wasn't, they weren't that generation. It was generations after.
Well, anytime the story gets passed verbally, everybody embellishes,
There's some embellishing that can go on too, sure. So strike the rock, keep that image. Strike the rock with what?
Staff.
With the staff. Okay. And what comes out? And what does water do? Refreshes, quenches thirst,
It gives you life, really.
gives you life.
You would die of lack of water before you would have.
You would. So you little Ugandan children driving in a bus with me, we're sitting together and we go by a pond. A 6-year-old little girl, Pastor Mark, water is life.
She knows.
Yeah, water is life. That's the common statement. And they were happy because after we were done, there was a well in their village that they no longer needed to walk 2 miles to a well or to that pond if they wanted to not walk as far, which was not as good as water though. And they had a well then.
We Americans would say that
We would. Yeah. All right. Those are the images. Strike the rock with a staff, and water comes out, and water quenches and refreshes and gives life. Okay. So let's look at 1 Corinthians 10. Is that the only story, by the way, in the journeys in the wilderness where Moses strikes a rock and water comes out?
Well, wasn't there when Moses got in trouble because he didn't do
Yep.
something with striking?
In Numbers. They come again to a place where there's no water. People are grumbling. Moses gets a little irritated and says, I brought water for you last time. I'll do it again. Boom. And because Moses doesn't ask of God and takes it on his own,
Doesn't happen.
it does happen.
Oh.
But God's consequence is what?
He won't be able to go into the promise.
Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. He can see it from Mount Pisgah, but he won't go into it himself.
That's when that happens.
So 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, notice the very first verse. We're going to read verse 1. For I do not want you to be ignorant. You know how many times Paul says that about these people? almost everything, every chapter. I don't want you to be ignorant. Now, ignorant doesn't mean stupid. You know what ignorant literally means?
Uninformed.
Uninformed. Is that what the ESV has?
No.
Yeah. It's a way that some translations have put that because a lot of people think ignorant is stupid. Nope. Ignorant just means uninformed. So, I do not want you to be uninformed of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea, that they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and they all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock which accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and their bodies were scattered over the desert. That's not part of our reading, but it is interesting to see where Paul's going with all this thing. Our reading stops at verse 14, or verse 4, for the sake of our lesson this week. But when we work through these first 4 verses, I'm going to skim down and look a little bit more. Well, what's Paul dealing with in all this warnings about Israel's history? Okay? But let's start with this. With you guys, any questions or wonderings that you have about what Paul's talking about here?
They're all baptized into Moses.
Yep. What do you think that means?
Mm.
Well, where did Moses lead them through?
The wilderness.
The wilderness, but more specifically, the Red Sea. Yeah. Being baptized is being immersed and washed in water.
Oh.
Did God bring them? And baptism into Christ is a washing of renewal and refreshment in water that takes you through death and resurrection. That's what Moses did, right? He took the people through certain death, being annihilated by Egyptians, to the resurrection of your enemy being destroyed. So yeah, that's the image that Paul is reminding them of. You're baptized into Moses. You were washed in the water of the Red Sea through a death and resurrection experience. So I think that's exactly what it's referring to. And Moses is reminding them then of the history of God's people in the Old Testament. That was Good Friday and Easter for them, right? That all this stuff had.
Well, we get down to 4, and then it kind of has of the Lord's Supper. So you got the 2 baptism and the Lord's Supper. You're kind of really.
Yeah. So not only did you pass through the sea, not only did you live under the cloud, not only did all that connect you to Moses, but you also had food and drink. And so that spiritual food and drink, out of the Passover and the manna, the things in the wilderness. But then Paul makes this connection. He connects the dots that have never been connected before until this. Who really accompanied them the whole way?
Christ.
Christ.
And he's the cloud, right?
And he's the rock.
And
that rock was Christ.
the rock was Christ. That's amazing.
So what Paul is doing, he's connecting dots that they have not seen before. Our forefathers thought that they were just drinking from a rock and getting water, but they didn't realize the one that accompanied them the whole way was Christ. He was the rock. And he's the only one that can truly quench thirst. What kind of thirst? Spiritual thirst. Emotional thirst. Relational thirst. You're not gonna, he's the one that provides water for our bodies. We know that, we need that. But a soul that doesn't have Christ is a dehydrated soul. And that's what Paul is connecting now, that they're not seeing, that they haven't seen. That Christ is the rock. He's the one that will quench a thirst that nothing else can quench. How did the psalmist praise that? We have a song that we sing to that. You guys probably sing it in the contemporary group.
There is no rock like our.
Oh, I didn't even know that one. I wasn't thinking of that one. But that would be one. It's about thirst, though, panting.
Oh,
As the deer.
As the deer.
As
As
the deer.
the deer.
Oh,
Psalm 42. Yep. As the deer pants by streams of living waters, so my soul pants for you, O God. Because if my soul is dehydrated, then I'm thirsty, right? And I need living water. And what Paul is doing, he's connecting these dots that they haven't seen before. That Christ was with them that whole way in the wilderness. Not only was he the cloud, not only was he the angel of God, but this is a prefiguring and a preshadowing of Jesus as being the rock as well. Yeah. And so when you strike the rock, what comes out? Water.
The nourishment.
The refreshment for life, quenching thirst. And Paul is saying that not only happened physically, but that can also happen spiritually. Was Christ ever struck with the staff?
When he was on
Didn't
the
they break
cross.
his leg?
Not before that.
Oh, before that.
Well, they struck him many times.
The soldiers that arrested him were mocking him, put a staff in his hand, a scepter. Tell us. And then they took it and they began smacking him on the head. Tell us, who was it that struck you? Yeah, he was struck with them. Yeah. And then even that staff got a little pointier at one point, and what happened?
Water came out.
They plunged it into his side
In water.
because they did not break his legs. Okay,
That would have been
They-
easier on him.
well they broke the legs of the two guys next to him
Yes,
because they wanted them to die quicker.
yes.
So, but they came to him and he was already dead. But to make sure that he was dead,
They stuck.
they take the spear, the staff, and pierce his side. And what flowed out? Water, blood, and water. Yeah, the writer is emphasizing that, and I saw it with my own eyes. John said, the one who is writing it saw it with his own eyes. It was not just blood, but water that poured out when he was struck. The rock was struck, and water comes out. And that water is quenching our dehydrated souls.
Did Martin Luther quote that famous hymn, Rock of Ages?
He didn't write Rock of Ages. No, Luther, I don't know who wrote Rock of Ages, but I know one Luther.
It's saying just what you're saying, Rock of Ages.
Yeah.
Not for me, let they water in its flood.
Oh,
Doesn't
okay.
say in the hymn book.
Rock of Ages, is it in our hymn book?
Well,
Good.
yeah,
I don't know what number.
I think it was 376 in the Lutheran hymn book. but-
John Wesley wrote a lot of hymns.
Yeah, I know it wasn't Luther.
Wasn't
Rock of
him.
Ages. All right, so now let's just skim out a little bit. Why is Paul? Now we stopped at verse 4 because it fits our theme of strike the rock and Christ is the rock. But Paul has got a reason why he's going to bring this up. Okay. So let's take a look at that. Verse 5. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. A lot of them died in that journey. Right? Now, these things occurred as examples, Paul says, to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. And what was the evil thing that they set their hearts on? Idols. Okay? Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. They made idols,
Something.
and they clung to everything but God. Their thirst, food, water, all these things you need, but they became idols. For as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and they got up to indulge in pagan revelry. That's a direct quote from what happened when they built the golden calf. We should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 20,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble as some of them did, and they were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples, and are written down as warnings for us. Because now Paul is saying, hey, Christians in Corinth, Corinthian Christians, don't think that idolatry is not an issue that you're going to have to deal with. Right? So if you think you are standing firm, be careful, verse 13 or 12, and that you do not fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted or tested beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, when you are tested, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. And then he's going to talk now about the Lord's Supper and remind them that, you know what, you can't be at the table of demons and the table of the Lord at the same time. You can't be idolaters and then in one hand, and then on the other hand, skip over to the Lord God and come to his table. Because God's not about idolatry. So, I'm going to read you a little, this was posting from our friend Chad Bird, if you follow him. He had this one a couple days ago, mentioning this passage from 1 Corinthians 4. So, in 1 Corinthians 10:4, Paul makes a striking claim. He says, they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. A rock that followed them, what does Paul mean? Paul is likely referencing a Jewish tradition that a miraculous rock or a well accompanied Israel through the wilderness supplying water. So there's this folklore, this tradition, that it was the same rock. So when they left Rephidim, they took the rock with them, right? So whenever they needed water, they'd have the source. Yeah. Now, because multiple biblical accounts mention Israel drinking from a rock, Exodus 17, Numbers 20, the legend arose that it was the same rock moving with them. Some later rabbinic writings describe it as Miriam's well. So it's kind of like they've got this portable artesian well that the tradition is. But notice how Paul transforms this tradition and Christifies it. He is saying, you are familiar with the legend of the moving rock, yes? Well, I tell you that the true rock that followed Israel was of the Spirit. And that spiritual rock was not a stone, but of God. It was Christ. The Son of God traveled with Israel. He protected them, he sustained them, he gave them drink. This sets up Paul's broader argument. For just as Israel was baptized into Moses through the Red Sea, so Christians are baptized into Christ. And just as Israel ate and drank from God's provision, so believers partake in the Lord's Supper. And yet these spiritual gifts, many Israelites fell into idolatry and they perished. So Paul's warning is clear. He says, do not foolishly assume that because you have been baptized as Israel had been, and because you eat and drink spiritual food and drink as Israel did, that idolatry will not harm you. On the contrary, he says you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? Rather, let us return from Israel. Let us learn from Israel that idolatry of all forms is deadly. Don't we all need to learn that always? That idolatry in whatever form it is deadly. And what is the human heart? An idol factory. We can set up so many things and try to cling to those to bring meaning, purpose, happiness, or satisfaction in our life. We would never grumble about God. Whatever you're grumbling about, that kind of reveals what your idolatry might be, your idol might be. His last thought was this. He says, we have all the God we need in Jesus Christ. In Jesus dwells the totality of Godhead in human flesh. To have Jesus, to have all of God. To drink from him is to never thirst again. To be baptized into him, to drink his cup of blessing, is to be in communion with the God who is one and who desires nothing more than to be one with us in Jesus. So that whole image of this, Christ is that rock that followed you. When you strike the rock, in the wilderness, water came out. You were sustained, you lived. Well, our souls need that too. And souls that don't have that are dehydrated and withering away. So what does Christ do? He allows himself to be struck. And water actually literally flows out from him to quench us, to tell us just how much what? God loves us. God wants us. He wants us. He doesn't need us, he wants us. He wants us to be his own. He doesn't need us to be his own. God's complete without us. But he does want us. Any more thoughts about this 1 Corinthians passage? questions?
I always was told or read that the whole, not only Moses was not allowed into the promised land, but that's why they wanted 40 years, but that whole first generation of all that be passed before their kids and grandkids were the ones that,
Yeah. And except for two.
oh yeah.
Two went into the promised land from that generation, Caleb and Joshua. The two spies who, when they went to go investigate the land, came back and said, yeah, we got this, because God's on our side. And the other 10 convinced everybody, we can't go, there's giants in that land. And they didn't, they grumbled against Moses and God again, right? And except for Caleb and Joshua. They said, no, we can do this. So 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. And they got to go into the promised land. Anything else? Anybody else? Wonderings?
So is the promised land kind of like going to heaven?
Yes. That is a type of going to heaven. You're right. And we follow that same path, right? The Exodus journey is our journey. Right? Are we wandering in a wilderness? Have we been baptized into Christ? Did we pass through the Red Sea? Yeah, our baptisms. We went from death to resurrection in our baptisms. We wander. Does God provide for us and sustain us in this wilderness? No, we come to his table. We eat of his body. We drink of his blood, sustaining us for this walk. When the people passed finally into the promised land, they had to pass through what? One more time. They crossed over water one more time. Yeah. Will we have a crossover finally into the promised land? Yeah, our death or Jesus' return will be the gate for us to pass through. One more gate to pass through. So yeah, the promised land is a type and a picture of what we would say is heaven. The Bible would say it's eternal life, the new heavens and the new earth. But I understand what we mean by when we say heaven. But I want us to understand that it's more than just floating on clouds, right? That it's a physical restoration of creation. That's our ultimate hope. It's a physical restoration of all things, including our bodies, right, and the earth that we live on. Because that's where God intends us to live for eternity, on an earth, not floating around in clouds.
Because that would get really boring.
It would be, and it's not what God intended for human beings. So never did, right? Never did. Good questions. All right, so let's move on. The gospel story, John chapter 4. So if you're got a theme about striking the rock and thirsting and water, well, there's no better story than to go to than John chapter 4. The woman at the well. All right, I'm gonna start reading at verse 1, but on Sunday our reading starts at 3. The Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. When the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and he went back once more to Galilee. So Jesus is leaving Judea, going to Galilee. Judea is down by Jerusalem. It's in the south. Galilee is in the north, up by the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus is heading back to Galilee, so he's heading north. And that would take him through what land? Samaria. Most Jews would avoid it. Jesus generally didn't. He was okay, because he wasn't technically a Jew, because he was not a Judea. He was not from Judea. He was a Galilean. Okay, but he was Jewish. I get that too. All right, verse 4. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was here, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How is it that you can ask me for a drink?" For you see, Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it was that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So that's where our story will end for Sunday, but the whole chapter continues on, and we're probably familiar with it. But let's start with you all before we look at any more of it. Any thoughts or questions that you guys have before we take a look at it a little deeper?
Well, it's the theme of the living water again.
It is the theme of the living water. And what's living water? Why would he say living water?
It's a spiritual thing.
Okay, so it is a little bit more than just thirsting at. But also, moving water is always more certain to drink than stagnant water. Yeah. But yeah, it is, right? Jesus has more in mind than just a bottle of water, right? He's talking about a spiritual thirst again. And he knows her spiritual thirst, doesn't he? Because she has clung to what? To always try to satisfy her thirst.
All her husbands.
Relationship with men.
Well, you mentioned it before when that young gal in Uganda, she said, "Water is living, is life."
Yeah. Yeah. And so this in ancient world, you didn't, go to the tap and just open up the tap and have water. You went to wells. And what time of the day is this?
6 hours.
The 6 hour. What is
Like
that?
noon?
It's high noon. It is high noon. The clock always starts at 6 in the morning, and then that's 9th hour is 3 in the afternoon. 6th hour is noon. Okay, so this is high noon. High noon in the Middle East is generally pretty sunny,
Kind of a late time for her to be getting water.
kind of late time, kind of warm, kind of hot, and she's all alone. Which kind of, we've talked about this before, maybe in a different study, kind of indicates the kind of woman she was. Other women don't want to be around her, and she didn't want to be around them. And when you ever went and fetched water, you generally went in groups for conversation, company, and protection. And you generally went early in the morning or late in the evening because of the coolness of the day. So if you want to avoid other people, when do you go get your water? At the time nobody else is going. Yeah. So I think Jesus picks up on all these cues. He gets it. Yeah. And she's a little taken aback when Jesus asked her for a drink. Will you give me a drink? And then, at least in the NIV, they put little things in parentheses. One of the guys I read who's studied John said these are John's little whispers. Right? His disciples had gone into town to buy food, right? Mm-hmm. So why is Jesus alone? Well, I got to tell you, they all went to get food, right? Mm-hmm. And then she's a little scandalized that a Jew is going to talk to her, a Samaritan, asking for a drink, and then at the end of verse 9, there's a little whisper, right? Yeah, you see the Jews, they don't associate with Samaritans. So he's got all these little whispers, and this is throughout all of John's Gospel, these little whispers that he gives, kind of explaining something behind the story. But again, the whole focus is then on this water. Yeah.
Too, it's like he knows we're going to be reading this. Mm-hmm. Not because in his day, people would know all of them.
John.
That.
Yeah.
That would have
yes
been a
and
surprise for anybody.
Yeah, the locals would have known that.
Yeah.
But
so he knew there were going to be. It was going to be a broader area of
yes.
people reading this.
For ages
that
to come.
That wouldn't necessarily know that.
Yeah, that's true.
That it had to be said.
Yeah. These little whispers to kind of clue us in. Yeah.
Yeah, because you could, if you go back and kind of glance at the page, earlier in the pages,
mm-hmm.
you could pick out all the parentheses of things he said, like in 3:24, he says, this was before John was put in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's clarifying a lot of stuff.
There is,
for people.
yeah. John does that all over the place. Puts these little whispers in. Yep. All right, so he set the stage now, right? Offering her this little living water. If you knew who was talking to you, you would have asked him for a drink, and he would have given you living water. He could quench your thirst. Jesus obviously is on another plane than she is at this moment. She's still thinking about cups of water and getting water from a well and fetching it every day.
This was really the water.
Yeah,
His water was really the water she needed.
And that could quench a thirst. And what's interesting is that in Jesus' day, the rabbis would call the books of Moses the Torah. They had three ways to describe it. They had many, but three of them were: it's the light of the world. The teachings of Moses were the bread of life. The teachings of Moses were the living water. Things that you can't live without, right? Bread, light, and water. And so you can't live without the books of Moses, the teachings of Moses. And what does Jesus say about the bread of life?
He is the bread of life.
I am the bread of life. I'm where you get the life with God. What does he say about the light?
I'm the light of the world.
I am the light of the world. And now he doesn't directly say it, but he does say in a way, I'm also I'm the living water. So Jesus says one in John's gospel is basically saying, I'm the fulfillment of the books of Moses, and I'm more than enough. You just don't need the books of Moses. You just don't need a how-to list to get right with God. You need me to get right with God. I'll sustain you.
You don't get it.
They don't get it. They were not going to get it.
Can't understand.
It's kind of curious, this is written in the third person, like John wasn't there apparently.
Right.
It's Jesus and the woman, so somebody, Jesus or the woman would have had told him.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah, John's not an eyewitness to this. He'd have to hear the story from one of the two. And my guess is it's a both and, because by the time that the woman and he are having this conversation, the disciples get back, right? So let's take a look at that. So let's just read the rest of the story, just because we got some time, and ask any questions you want. So, verse 11. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? So it's piqued her curiosity, right? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it, as did also his sons and flocks and herds? And Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give will never thirst. Indeed, the water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, now she's really piqued. Give me this water so that I won't get thirsty. Again, I think her level is still just
physical.
the water is life thing, physical water. And I want to keep coming to draw water to the well. So Jesus says, okay, go call your husband and come back. Bingo! Jesus just nailed it on the head. Why is her soul so thirsty?
Because she's had many husbands.
And she's clung to these things for her life, and they're not going to satisfy. Right. I have no husband, she replied. You're right, Jesus said. When you have no husband, the fact is, you've had 5, and the man that you're with now is not your husband. What you said is quite true. Now she wants to change the topic. Verse 19, Sir, I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on the mountain, but you Jews claim the place that we must worship is in Jerusalem. So she wants to get into a theological debate between Samaritans and Jews. We go to Gerizim. We worship the same God, but you Jews say that we can't worship at Gerizim because only God is in Jerusalem. So who's right? Jesus says, woman, time's coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor at Jerusalem. Wrong question, in other words. Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. And they are the kinds of worshipers the Father seeks. So God's not interested about where you go to worship, but who you worship. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth. Now the woman says, okay, I know that you're the Messiah. And then there's a little whisper. What does Messiah mean? Christ. Yeah, he's the anointed one. I know that the Messiah is coming, this anointed one. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. Because they have this image that the Messiah was the great revealer. And Jesus then, most clearly, anytime he ever says it, I who speak to you am he. I'm the Messiah. I'm that anointed one. Now, just then, the disciples return. And they were surprised to find him speaking with a woman. But nobody at that time asked, what do you want or what are you talking about? Now, I think, John, what happened is, at that moment, the disciples going, what's going on here, Jesus, after she leaves? And then they end up spending a couple days with them. And so they're going, why are we spending a couple days here in this village with these Samaritans? And I think Jesus probably told them the story. Well, you know, I was at the well and she came up. And so then I think that's how John knows the story. Just speculation, but I think that's probably what happens. So the disciples return, verse 28. Then leaving her water jar. Isn't that curious?
Yeah, she went out there to get
She was
water.
really
She
excited.
left it.
And John tells us that little detail. I think it's more than just she's excited. I think that's part of it. But I think John, in a symbolic way, is telling us what?
She accepted God's word.
She drank from the water. She drank from the well that really
She was.
mattered
So she was refreshed
spiritually.
spiritually.
That she not that she'll never need to draw water again, but that I think that's a little detail. When she starts following Jesus, she'll leave something
And she
behind.
stays with him.
Well, no,
Eventually, doesn't she?
no,
stay?
she stays in the village.
Oh, she.
So the woman went back to the town and said to the people, now this is big and risky, because they kind of know what kind of woman she is, right? Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah, the Christ? They came out to the town and they made their way toward him. Meanwhile, the disciples urged him, Rabbi, eat something. But Jesus said, I have no food. I have food to eat that you know nothing about. And the disciples said to each other, could someone have brought him food? Jesus says, no, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish the work. Do not say 4 months. We'll skip that part. So skipping on to verse 39. This completes the story now with the woman. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in Jesus because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more believed. And they said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is Savior of the world. And so I think they get the whole story eventually. John hears about it because of these 2 days that they stayed in this village with Jesus, who then brings many more who drink from the water of life. And they really know who the Savior of the world is.
And the disciples, they're learning all the time. Jesus is still always teaching them.
He is, yeah. They're not happy about being in Samaria, but they are. Luke tells us on the final journey, when some Samaritan villages won't welcome Jesus, they want to bomb him. Should we call fire? James and John, the sons of Zebedee, sons of thunder. Should we call fire, God, and have God's fire burn up these villages that are not accepting you? Jesus, no. That's not how I roll. And later, guess who goes back to those villages and preaches about Jesus?
James and John.
John does for sure. John and Peter are the ones who will take the gospel to the Samaritans in Acts chapter 8. Yeah. All right. So that whole image of water then, that water of life, that we all need water. And how do you get the water? Strike the rock. And Jesus, in his great love for you, for me, for all the world, is willing to be struck with the staff, because he is the rock, to give us that love, to quench our soul thirst that only he can quench. All right. Any other thoughts or questions about John 4?
Well, I have a question that.
Yeah, please.
So Jacob's well,
Okay.
is this a Jacob that got sold into slavery?
No, that Jacob was the father. Joseph got sold.
Joseph.
Yeah.
Joseph's
This
father.
is, yes.
But that's who that is,
That,
Joseph.
this is Joseph. Yeah. Mhm.
There was that spiritual song, I am climbing Jacob's ladder. This was in, when he was younger, Jacob was younger.
Yeah, it seems like Jacob and this is a time when Joseph is still in the land. So he doesn't get sold right away.
Yeah.
So Jacob must have given him this well sometime before he was actually sold into slavery.
And this is Jacob and his brother Esau.
Yeah, that's the same Jacob. Yeah, this is Jacob. Where
Esau was kind of a sneaky guy, wasn't he?
well, he was the hunter. Esau was the hunter.
Oh, so Jacob was the favored by the father.
Esau
Esau was.
Esau.
Isaac was the father.
Yeah,
Isaac.
Isaac is the
Isaac.
father of Jacob and
Yeah.
Esau. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, so Jacob gets the blessing though,
Yeah,
because he tricked his father.
because he made himself smell like a hunter.
Yep, and put the hairy stuff on his
Oh,
arms.
I knew that.
Yep.
Yeah, Isaac
And
was
he
blind.
and his mama, he was a mama's boy. Esau was the daddy's boy, and Esau gives away the birthright, and then Jacob tricks the father into the blessing. Right. So now Jacob comes back, and with his big family, they reconcile. Esau married Hittite girls, which did not impress mommy or daddy. So Jacob married girls from the clan, because he went back to Uncle Laban and got the girls from the family clan, right? And brought them back, and then has all these kids, and one of them being Joseph, the firstborn of his favorite wife, Rachel. And so he was the favorite one, right? So whatever this is, it says Jacob gave this well to his son Joseph. This would have been before his being sold into Egypt.
So they're on their way to Galilee. Is this their trip here? It
Yeah,
says,
yeah.
is this
they're
when
passing
he
through
was
there.
rejected when he got there? And they said just shake the dust and
It's hard to
because he
know
wasn't
because
accepted.
John's not doing a chronological story.
Oh, okay.
John has Jesus
So I
in Jerusalem and then in Galilee, and he's all over the place because the cleansing of the temple already happened in John chapter 2.
okay. Well then it can't be.
Yeah, it's just
It's
one
another
on one of
trip.
the journeys. It's on one of their journeys.
It's just one big trip.
Yeah, it's just I mean they made the
Okay.
journeys to Jerusalem multiple times.
Oh yeah.
Now the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, those three, they'll finally tell the final journey that Jesus makes from Galilee down to Jerusalem. Okay? They make it a big deal of that. John doesn't. John has Jesus. He's not. John's
Oh, right.
telling the story circularly like this. They're doing it linearly. So they're different approaches. John's writing in a way different pattern than they are.
Yeah.
John's writing in themes of signs and 7 signs and 7 I am statements and things like that. And he's just kind of repeating the same themes but doing it circularly. Where Matthew, Mark, and Luke all take Jesus in a chronological storyline. John doesn't do that at all.
Okay.
You don't try to follow John chronologically. It don't make sense. Geographically or chronologically.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely.
But he's got something important to say, just a different
Just
way of
said
saying it. And it's a more Hebrew way of actually teaching. It's a very wisdom way of teaching.
Yeah.
The Hebrews were known for the Jewish way of writing. All right. Anything else from all y'all? Cool beans. All right. Good discussion.